Niels, how do you pronounce your surname?
First name's Niels, and my last name is Tangherlini.
So we're in city, are we at the moment? So the
San Francisco,
Right.
and we're just leaving General Hospital.
and so you're a paramedic. You've been in San Francisco for how long?
Let's see, I started with the city in 1994, and I used to work over in Oakland before that, so I've been a paramedic since 1990.
Right. Now, some of the universal problems, well, I don't want to say problems, let's say one of the shared patient load that we have is our regular patients.
Exactly.
And I think no matter which country you go to in the world, you've always got that patient which always crops up on the system.
Absolutely.
Describe that patient to me in the San Francisco setting.
In San Francisco, I mean, there's a variety of populations that become frequent users of EMS, or frequent callers, or frequent flyers, whatever term you want to use. But overwhelmingly, our frequent users of EMS tend to be between 40 to 60 years of age, are mostly male, and are overwhelmingly homeless, chronic inebriates, and they usually have some comorbid, severe and persistent mental illness, and probably comorbid medical issues as well, usually some sort of liver troubles or seizures or some other medical issue.
How are these patients presenting to your system?
We tend to see them as, we run about 15,000 calls a year for person down. And the person down or man down calls, and when we get there, overwhelmingly these are calls for people who are chronic inebriates, passed out, or have just had a withdrawal seizure, and a large number of these are these same patients, the same handful of patients that we see over and over and over again.
And it's draining quite a large resource. Do you want to give just an example of the kind of resources you're sending out? So when this man down...
So if a call comes in for man down on the corner, since there's no way to know whether it's, the regular citizen or visitor who's having a cardiac arrest versus, Joe, who we pick up twice a day, Joe, a made-up name, we will send out the closest fire engine.
Right.
And if that fire engine is what we call a basic life support, it only has EMTs, we'll then also send the closest advanced life support fire engine. And with our current staffing, that means 2 fire engines with 8 people, and then we'll also send the closest ambulance. And all of our ambulances are advanced life support. So that's 3 vehicles and 10 people.
And I'm assuming you'd also have police on scene as well?
If sometimes the police will respond as well. So it may be, as many as 15 people in 5 vehicles.
So huge resources being sent.
Huge number of resources.
Right. So what are you guys doing differently?
Well, starting in 2004, if you go back to 2004, this problem had reached such a proportion that in certain parts of the city, our response times had gotten pretty bad. And the chief, the San Francisco fire chief, is a very proactive person who really does want to create what we call an all-hazards agency. We handle fire, we handle rescue, we handle EMS, but we also handle preventing things, disaster preparedness and prevention. And the mayor at the time wanted us, had a presentation from the chief about this problem, and both agreed that we needed to make some changes. So we enacted the nation's first ever EMS-based outreach team, and it was called the San Francisco Fire Department Homeless Outreach and Medical Emergency Team, and it was staffed by one paramedic captain, myself, and in addition to being a paramedic, I had gone back to school and gotten a bachelor's degree in social welfare from Berkeley, where I had this incredible opportunity to work with a professor, Lonnie Snowden, who had really pioneered this notion of a small number of folks using a lot of resources. And he had looked at the mental health system, but I had brought him this idea that that problem exists in other systems as well. particularly EMS. And his first response was, "What's EMS?"
Right.
Which was a great education in itself, because when you reach out to other systems of care, they'll often start with, "What's EMS? What do you mean EMS?"
I think
And so
other agencies don't realize they're not the only agency with the same problem.
with the same problem,
Yeah.
and they also don't know. They know that if you call 911, you can get an ambulance, and they often wonder why there's also a fire truck that comes, but they don't know that it's an organized system of care, and they don't think about how their high-using clients may be affecting the rest of affecting that organized system of care. They just think if you call 911 or 999 in your case, an ambulance will come, and it will come quickly. So we put together this notion of, we put together this team that had a paramedic captain, and we initially formulated as a joint outreach team with the Department of Public Health and the Department of Human Services. And the idea was you'd have a paramedic captain and then social workers or nurses who would join into this outreach effort. And we would go search for the highest users. We'd get a list every month of anyone who used the ambulance 4 more times in the previous month.
So you've identified your frequent flyers.
We identify and we set the bar high because it was such a small team. We needed to set the bar a little bit high. But then as people got to know who we were, and we got good at what we did, we educated the other providers, the fire engines, the ambulances, the police cars. They became our eyes and ears, and they would let us know. We would often, before we got so good that before we even got our list, we knew who the frequent callers were. We knew who was going to be on the list, and we would try to intervene and keep them off the list. So
typically, what's happening? You were getting this call, and traditionally, this patient was being parceled and conveyed straight to the ED.
Exactly.
Is that right?
They would you just pick them up.
You're passing the log jam along.
Exactly. You call, we haul, that's all. We would pick them up, bring them to the ER. ER would let them sober up. And then, at one point, actually, before we started our team, San Francisco had created a sobering center, which was to disimpact the ERs. They created a somewhat medically staffed facility where people who met certain criteria could be transported to sober up safely. And then they would go, the average stay was about 4 to 6 hours. The patients would wake up and would need to go out and drink again before they started to have withdrawal seizures. So it created just another revolving door. And so by 2004, even with the sobering center in place, all we had was a lot of revolving doors and a lot of people who we were just transporting over and over and over.
So now you've got this team. Okay, you're identifying these high need patients at the point of the call, on the actual 911 call, or how? I mean, if they're homeless, how are you finding them to prevent?
So we did two. That's a really actually a good question. There were two ways that we would deal with clients. One is we would come on duty and turn on our radio, and we were in an emergency response. We had a van, so that if we could get somebody, if they didn't need a ride to the ER, we could convey them somewhere else in the van. And it had lights and a siren and paramedic gear so that they could actually dispatch us on calls. So if the call came in, let's say at this street corner, and the dispatcher felt like this was going to be a frequent caller, they would send the fire engine and the ambulance in case it's a cardiac arrest, but they could also send us. And if we were close, we would often be the first ones there and cancel everybody else.
Freeing up the resource.
Free up those resources, and then start working on redirecting that person into different sources of care. And that was our main. But between calls, the great thing about the way we did it is between calls, we were never still. And so the thing was, if you weren't on a call, you would go out with your list, and you would you'd go out with phone messages from other crews, and you'd look for these folks. And you would tell crews, we're out there looking, so if you see them on the corner, let us know. And we would find people outside before they'd called 911. We'd go search for them and say, hey, are you Joe, are you Bill, are you whatever, are you this person? We're here to help you.
Right.
Let's figure out what's going on, and let's get you the care you need, because we don't want to keep taking you by hand.
So this is one central role with
Yes.
with your crews feeding into you.
They're your eyes and ears.
Right.
They're directing you to where
And
to
most
go.
of these crews know these patients already.
They know them. They'll be driving around they'll be driving over to the coffee shop to get coffee and go, hey, there's Joe.
Yeah.
Let's call EMS. Say, hey, EMS 6, Joe's on the corner. Now, I'll be right there.
Right.
I'm looking for them.
So how are you engaging with these patients? So what kind of help?
So the first trick was to figure out who these people are, and that's how I can tell you, predominantly what those clients were. There were some other subpopulations. There were some isolated seniors, many who suffered from dementia or depression or some other issues. And so once you identified the generally speaking, the populations you were going to deal with, what we did is we would reach out to the different systems of care and figure out what would be the treatment we would need to get, what kind of services do we need to get going for Joe to get him off the streets and out of to stop using 911 because he now has a place to live, or he's been through alcohol treatment and has a place to live. He has a social worker that's working with him. He has a primary care doctor. And for the isolated seniors, many of them are truly isolated. They would benefit from a public health nurse. They would benefit from a visiting nurse, or they would benefit from some sort of geriatric care. And
Just putting that
but they're
patient-
calling 911 because they don't have any of that. The ER is too busy to get any of that. So my job is I'm going to go out, and when I contact this person, I'm going to figure out what they need. And what I've done is I've reached out to so many systems of care and put together so many pathways to use that when I get, I may deal with Joe, the chronic inebriate, homeless chronic inebriate, right now this morning, and I get him into a system of care. I get him into a medical detox, and I find a social worker who's going to open him as a client and look at a housing program and do some other stuff with him. And now I get called out to the Richmond district where there's a lot of isolated seniors, and I have somebody who's elderly who's calling 911 because they keep falling, but really the problem is they're depressed and they're a hoarder clutterer and they have some other issues. So now I'm going to call in a different set of resources that I know of, and I'm going to really push those other resources to get involved. And the beauty is, you may put together a referral system for your ambulances to use, but for the most part, if they make the referral and nothing ever happens and they just keep going back there, they're just going to keep making the same referral. In this system, if we make the referral and nothing happens, we've got somebody who can go back out there, meet with the client. Well, why aren't you, a case that I'm dealing with right now, there was a system of care, and she said, well, they're just not helping me. And when I talked to the care providers, they said, well, we try to, she won't talk to us. So now I can go back to the client and say, well, look, I've talked to your social worker, and they say you're not really working with them.
Yeah.
You're not engaging.
So this
with
is
them.
the non-compliant patient.
So the paramedic is really the good. We're really good at assessing, and we're really good at, instead of helping people move on. And it's a little different from the social work milieu. I would meet with a client and find out why they don't want to move on, and then I would back off and wait till they were ready. In the paramedic world, we don't really have that luxury. If we have somebody who's in a car accident and they don't want to go to the hospital, and they need to go to the hospital, we're going to convince them to go to the hospital. And it's the same way, because that set of skills is the same thing that we're using to engage these frequent callers. My message to them frequently is, and they say, well, I don't want your help. Well, here's the thing. I tell them, you're calling 911, you're inviting us into your life. And I come, and the reason it's good for it to be part of the EMS system is you say, look, I am part of this EMS system. When you call 911, expecting the fire truck and the ambulance to just take care of your problem right now in the short term, that doesn't work. And I'm here as part of that system to say we need to come up with a long-term solution.
So this is a very much hands-on. This is
very hands-on.
This is on the street.
Exactly.
Is that why it works?
The only way that's going to work. It does not work as an administrative function behind the scenes. You need to physically meet with the clients, engage them, and you need to physically engage with those agencies that are supposed to provide services and may or may not.
Now, what kind of services in the San Francisco environment are you tapping into? So we've mentioned the sobering unit.
We have a sobering center,
right?
But beyond, so if we are talking about a chronic inebriate, we're lucky in San Francisco that we have a standalone medical detox, and I would recommend any city, any large area that has chronic inebriates should have a standalone medical detox, because there could be nothing more expensive than medically detoxing alcoholics on inpatient hospital units.
Now these are centres which are accessible by ambulance crew direct. They don't have to be referred by a doctor.
Well, actually,
or
so
is there criteria? What's the
the
criteria?
sobering center, the ambulance can access directly, and we have criteria where the patient has to have a blood sugar between 60 and 200, and a
So you're ruling
pulse
out the
rate between
diabetics,
80
right?
and 120,
Right.
and a certain blood pressure, and they can't have any fresh trauma and above the clavicles. So there's a variety of criteria, but that's just to bring them to sobering. To go to medical detox, they actually do need a referral, and they need to have a medical workup done and bloods drawn, so they know exactly what they're dealing with. And if it's there's a small percentage of chronic alcoholics who need IV benzos and need to be stepped down very carefully, but probably well over 90% can get oral medication. And the standalone medical detox is a place where they get to be off the street, get food, clothing, shower. They do a little bit of group therapy, and they give them benzos and step them down slowly.
Right.
So when I had my team, we figured out that was what a huge, probably, 70 to 80% of our clients needed medical detox. And so I got really, really good at getting guys, A, to go to medical detox, and B, getting through all the different little hurdles you needed to get somebody into medical detox. I started and ended every single day talking to the intake nurse at medical detox. And so we got so good at it, we could sometimes, many clinics or outreach teams or whatever will say it's amazing if you get one client into medical detox in a day, because it's only a 30-bed facility. I would sometimes get 3 in. I mean, you could do it. It's all in how you did it and how aggressive you were about tracking down your client and getting them in the right place at the right time. And so we were able to get, I think it was close, between 500 and 600 guys to go to medical detox one year. And then, once they're at medical detox, the other trick was to make sure you followed up. You went to the medical detox and met with the clients as they were sobering up and convinced them to go to the next step, which is alcohol treatment. And then reaching out to all the different treatment providers and, convincing them that they were going to take my clients, or what they started to call them, Captain Niels' kids. And everybody knew them to be the most difficult clients. They didn't want them. So,
these are the patients which are resource training.
These are the patients
and
that
they repeat non-compliance.
Well,
patients.
it was very interesting. What we noticed with them is if you didn't break the ambulance ER street revolving door, as they got sicker, the revolving door becomes ambulance ER ICU inpatient street, ambulance ICU inpatient, and it starts to get.
One of your stations.
This is one of our stations right here. We have 42 of them. But our ambulances are so busy, we don't keep them in the fire stations. We have them out. We have them work 10 and 12-hour shifts, and we move them dynamically around the city. We tried having them at the fire stations on a 24-hour shift, but they were just, you'd run 30 calls in 24 hours. So we moved towards a system that we thought would be more tenable for the paramedics and more useful to the system.
So this patient, you're starting to notice a decline. The admissions are now going ICU, is getting more expensive. So trying to break that cycle, is that one of the
Exactly.
key?
So you want to break that cycle, and ideally you do it with voluntary treatment. And so in traditional social work, if the client says, I'm not ready, you just kind of sit back and wait till they're ready. In this kind of technique, the way we worked is, the fact that you're using our system so much, you're ready now. And we really try to use what's called a Johnson-style intervention, where if there's the popular TV show Intervention, where the family gets together and say, we love you, we want you to go to care, and if you won't, we won't be able to do these things. And the way we work is, we come and we say, look, we represent public health, but we also represent public safety. And we have all this good stuff, voluntary system of care for you, and if you will come with us now, we'll get you in. And if you tell us no, and you're going to keep doing what you do, there are involuntary options as well.
Right, now touch on that. So when you've got this repeat patient, somebody who's persistently using the services. I mean, we've got patients 2, 3, 4 times a day.
Yeah.
The cruise.
Oh yeah.
So this is a constant. In financial terms, and at the end of the day, financial terms are important. This is a drain on the system.
Drain on the system,
Right.
and then also those ambulances aren't available for the person who's having a cardiac arrest. The ER is full. You know, you have somebody who's having a stroke and they can't go to the closest ER.
How do you now? What powers do you have to utilize get this patient into the system?
The approach we took is we will ideally have everybody go voluntarily into some system of care, but we're not afraid to work with involuntary system. We're not afraid to work with the police and say, bring in the officer whose beat this is and say, this is the person who's a problem on your beat. We're offering them all this good stuff. They're saying no. So know that when you see them, they're refusing the good stuff, which is here right now. You should feel free to arrest them, cite them, really not tolerate this behavior, because this behavior is killing them.
And this is typically the drunk in public.
The drunk in public, peeing in public, having open containers, sleeping in people's doorways, doing stuff that if they take the system of care, they won't have to do.
Right.
The things that are really just the symptoms.
So that's making the patient self-aware of their environment.
Exactly.
The recourse is that there's going to be a no tolerance. I think the term that you're using, low tolerance. That the legal side is going to be stepping in.
Right. And for some of these folks, what you find out though is when you make it clear that their world is going to get very small, and there's a system of care that can help them, and then there is a law enforcement system that is not going to tolerate the behavior. With many of them, you realize that doesn't matter because they're either cognitively impaired or they're very mentally ill, and it really doesn't change their behavior. And in that case, now that is a very good assessment tool in realizing that there are some people, now we have to take actions to get them into a safe environment where they can be taken care of and not going to get victimized. And then the community is going to be, as I tell them, I want to make you safe, but I also want to make the community safe.
Now you've got a legal tool, which you're referring to as if it was
5150.
Now this is a legal tool, and how does that empower you?
So that is a psychiatric hold in the state of California, in the Health and Safety Code, section 5150. A police officer or a licensed social worker or psychiatrist, and in some counties they are now letting specially trained paramedics do this. You can put somebody on a 5150 hold that says by law, if they are, because of a mental illness or mental health symptoms, a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or gravely disabled, so they're not able to provide for their food, clothing, or shelter, they can be held for up to 72 hours in a psychiatric facility against their will.
Right.
And
currently, what type of paramedic is able to initiate that?
there's a couple of counties where they've given some. I know Santa Barbara County has been doing it actually for about 20 years. They created what they call a mental health assessment technician. So they took a paramedic and they gave them additional mental health training. And that allows them to use these 5150 holds. I, as part of my team, it was one of the tools that I was trying to be allowed to use, and was running into some political resistance, and in creating community paramedic curriculums and working with other systems, I recommend that community paramedics be allowed to use this tool.
Now obviously that's a tool, it's your last chance, your last hope, where this patient's not compliant, and it's in their best interest that they need some kind of intervention.
So that tool itself, though, I mean, that's only a first step, and that's one of the things is that you quickly learn is that you have to be able to do more than just first steps. If you just go with a 5150, once you get to the facility that's going to assess them, you need to work with that facility to fill out their picture of how this person exists in the community. So if they don't have the real picture and they look at that person just in the moment right in front of them, they will frequently discharge folks into very dangerous and untenable situations, and the cycle will just you've just created another revolving door.
And that's where this profession is. We're the eyes. We're in that person's front room. We're sitting on the couch. We see what kind of environment that.
We're in the street. We're in the gutter. We're where they are.
We're touching briefly on this term, community paramedic.
Yes.
Is this a community paramedic role?
Yes. So we did this. We engaged in this role from 2004 till 2009, and really developed a lot of techniques and methods that you could. And part of my goal was to really pay attention to the techniques that we used and figure out, could those be a teachable set of knowledge and skills? And they clearly are a teachable set of knowledge and skills. And then working with people doing little pilot projects. There's a lot of rural pilot projects where they would take paramedics. You know, the challenges they faced were, you know, people with low-level medical problems who didn't have good access to care, and would just call the ambulance for the, you know, 2-hour ride to the closest hospital, and they would just strip an area of their resources. So their challenge was to figure out a set of clinical skills that would allow the paramedic to intervene until somebody could get to a clinic or until they could be conveyed to a clinic. And so if you take that set of knowledge and skills and put it with that set of knowledge and skills, you really start to develop a new type of paramedic. And you have these isolated projects, many of which I helped start around the country, engaging in different efforts. And eventually there was a group called the International Roundtable on Community Paramedics that pulled us all together to write a curriculum that would combine all these knowledge and skills. The thought being that the experienced paramedic is a really good platform on which to build this new type of EMS provider. EMS systems should evolve to have these new type of EMS provider, and the term for them would be a community paramedic. I mean, the challenge has always been, well, what do you call it? Paramedic outreach worker, paramedic case manager, which I always discourage. Don't ever call yourself a case manager. But really the term is community paramedic.
Now, if a service wants to address this problem of just reducing that call-outs, that frequent patient, where do they start? You're saying identifying.
So I think the place to start is one, acknowledging that you want your EMS system to evolve, and then the next step is to do the needs assessment. So look at what are the populations you're dealing with. And you can do that by looking at your call volume. You can look at who the repeat callers are. You can sort of assess the charts. What do the paramedics tell you?
Right. And how much information or advice do you take from the paramedics?
I think a lot. I think that they have a fairly good picture of who they're dealing with. And, you know, some out of frustration may give you some editorial comments that aren't helpful, but for the most part, people really, I think, take great pains to say, you know, to learn a little bit more about their patients, and we'll tell you give you a fairly good picture of what's going on with their patients. You can also follow up with the hospitals, other providers who may be involved. And then I think the next step is to if you're going to have community, at this point, I say if you're going to have community paramedics, we as a profession need to say we want them to be educated to a certain standard.
Right. And what is that standard?
And so, like I said, there is a curriculum available through the International Roundtable of Community Paramedics, and anyone who goes through this course, it's like a semester-long course, would be educated to do the needs assessment, would be educated to figure out how to put together the different systems of care, or what I call it in the course, I call a web of resources. How does a paramedic interact with different providers and agencies? How do you make that connection? And then teach them the technique of how do you engage with a client and how do you engage a client into different sources of care. And then at the very last, the seventh module in the course is they go through a clinical module where you know, if your system really needs somebody who can bridge the gap between the patient that you're seeing in an isolated area and the primary care or the urgent care setting, a set of clinical skills that we think would be a set of wound care skills and things like using an otoscope, or you know, a set of skills that we think would really, for the most part, address the largest number of patients you would see, whether it's rural, urban, or suburban. You know, how would you? What set of clinical skills? We kind of boil down. What set of clinical skills would any community paramedic need? So I would encourage systems to really start. And I would encourage EMS providers to advocate that community paramedic is a defined set of knowledge and skills that a paramedic can attain to become this provider, just like at one point we had to advocate that a paramedic was something different than an EMT. So this is the next evolution in EMS provider, and then the system should have, you know, depending on the demand that they're looking at. You know, in a big city like this, we should have half a dozen people doing this. And those half a dozen...
how many have you currently got?
0. We've got me. They call me, as everyone says, it's like my hobby. It's my extra duty that I do. And
well,
so...
It clearly identifies there's a need for it. I mean, just because the program's finished, it doesn't,
yeah,
doesn't mean
the need is still there, and the need is great. And,
right.
you know, you can either... I know in Washington, D.C., they tried to just keep adding ambulances and keep adding ambulances and keep adding ambulances.
Throwing more resources.
And when they got up to 30-some-odd ambulances, a very forward-thinking EMS chief there, Rafael Sada, said, well, why don't we do something to reduce the call volume? And they reached out, and I helped them start their team, which I'm hoping is still was doing a great job. It was called Street Calls Initiative. And they really were able to reduce the high call volume there as well. So, you know, in a big city, it should be several providers. In some rural areas, you know, it may be one provider. But you need to have this addition. And it's not, the question comes up, is this going to be more work for the people working on those ambulances? And I would say no. I think you should add providers to the system.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I was asking, is whose responsibility is to coordinate this? Realistically, the guys on the ambulance,
No.
Are they in a position to do that?
No. I think their responsibility should be to get additional education to identify clients who need the service, but they shouldn't be the ones who have to provide the service.
You still need this role. You
still need the ambulance. You still need the resources that are going to address the cardiac arrest or the car wreck or the shooting. You need the additional resource that can come in and deal with the long term to really. I would say, you know, in a day, if I had a couple of clients that were really difficult and I was going to have to spend, you know, several hours dealing with one of them, then I would deal with one of them for several hours. But the point was to get the job done, to make sure that we were going to engage in a set of actions that would reduce, that would free up the ambulances, that would free up the fire trucks, free up the ER, quite frankly, and the hospital to deal with other folks.
So EMS has changed. We're not reacting to an incident now. We're shifting our whole emphasis.
We need to be a proactive agency that really helps communities realize what healthcare is supposed to be about. You know, which is promoting health, and we need to be able to respond in different ways. You know, if somebody's calling 911 3 times a day because their needs are unmet, we need to get out there and do something about it. We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over. As I said, you're never going to house a homeless person with an ambulance, and you're certainly never going to treat a kid's asthma by taking him to the ER once a week. You know, you're not gonna treat high blood pressure by waiting till a 35-year-old person has a stroke. You know, and when the answer is who should deal with it? I say it's us. I say it's EMS, and I say it's paramedics.
That is actually brilliant. That's my opener. Nice one.
All right. Pleasure.
Actually, pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Great stuff.